Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm talking about my favorite archetype from the Justice Hunters format, Yummy, and the fundamental weaknesses in the Yummy game plan. If you're new to my channel, I tend to stay away from combos and spreadsheets because that type of content is everywhere and does not give you a fundamental understanding of how Yu-Gi-Oh works. Instead, I focus on deck theory and game plan. This is a deck theory video on the fundamental weaknesses of the Yummy game plan. And so if you are wanting to play Yummy yourself or you want to learn how to beat Yummy, this will be important because you'll know how to exploit the worst flaws in the Yummy archetype. So I'm going to show you a few different things. Firstly, I'll go through a list of the core weaknesses in the Yummy game plan. I'll then also show you a few different ways you can play Yummy, including with Fiendsmith or the Azamina stuff. And I'll explain why, even though you can fix some of the fundamental flaws by playing other sub-engines outside of the pure variant, you're going to introduce other weaknesses into the Yummy deck. And so you need to understand how that works in order to play the deck optimally. Okay, so let's get started actually first by showing you an extremely basic combo sequence because I think it's important that you keep in mind what the Yummy end board is supposed to look like and the process to get there as I go through these weaknesses so that you have a little bit of context to situate these bullet points that I'm going to go through in. So the absolute most basic thing you can do with Yummy is that you start with a blank Yummy name. It doesn't really matter what it is. Preferably you're starting with Cupsy and you can search Surprise because Surprise is basically like the best card in the entire deck. But you have your blank Yummy name and you go into your Snatchy, which will give you your minion. This is going to be one of the absolute most critical cards that we talk about in this video, but maybe not for reasons that you think. So the minion is going to allow you to bring back your body from the graveyard. So this one blank Yummy turned into 3 cards and 2 of them are monster bodies. So those can go into something like a Cupsy Yummy Way, and those we're going to search for 2, whatever names you're missing, so the Lollipop and the Cupsy, and then on your summon number 5, you can summon your Cupsy and search for Surprise. Now, this right here is basically the most fundamental, the most basic, the most straightforward aspect of Yummy. Whatever you were trying to do, whatever build of Yummy you're trying to play, should be doing this. Firstly, you have a Yummy Synchro on your end board with the link 1 and your options for other names in the graveyard. Because when your opponent activates a card or effect and you tag this out for cost, you're going to bring out the link 1 and whatever your toolbox effect is. So usually it's going to be Cookie for the pop, sometimes it's going to be Lollipop for the shuffle back or the banish, and then sometimes it's going to be, if you don't have anything to target to banish in the graveyard or shuffle back or a good pop for a Cookie, then you're usually going to be using the Cupsy for a draw or a search if you're, really into a particular type of search. The point is, this is what Yummy is trying to do. Yummy Surprise I count as one of the most fundamental aspects of the Yummy game plan as well, because you don't want to lose to some random BS like a Dark Ruler and then your monsters don't do anything anymore. You want to have a layer that is hard for your opponent to interact with. So whatever they do to your end board, you're still going to be able to surprise, for example, and bring out a destroyed Cupsy Yummy Way, something like that. So Surprise in the Spell and Trap zone and your Synchro here with all of your options in the graveyard, this is what Yummy is trying to do. So now let's talk about some of the issues with this game plan, because you have a ton of interaction here. You may be thinking, what's the issue? What's the problem? You can go Cupsy Yummy Way and you can cycle through everything. You have your pop off the Cookie, you have your double book off the Cookie Yummy Way. As you go through Cupsy, you're going to be searching for more stuff. You're going to be out-resourcing your opponent, but there are some flaws here. So first, let's talk about the field spell, because this is one of the biggest issues with the deck. So this card says Yummy monsters you control gain 500 attack for each light beast monster on the field. It also says if this card is in your graveyard, you can target 2 Yummy monsters in your graveyard and or banishment, place this card and them on the bottom of the deck in any order. Now the resource recycling aspect of this card, even though you can target Yummy monsters that are in your grave or banishment, this card can't be banished. This has to be in your graveyard. Okay, so that's very important. If your opponent banishes this card, you are basically not getting it back. Now what you have to understand about this card, what really makes this card very good, is this attack boost, the 500 attack for each light beast monster you control, is basically a win condition. So this is how you OTK with massive attack damage, or how you run over monsters, which is important for board clear, not just for being able to kill your opponent, just to be able to remove monsters from your opponent's field. This is very important. So running over monsters or ending the game is basically a win condition. So this field spell, you should treat this as a win condition for Yummy. Now, if you do not have your field spell, not only is your win condition potentially removed, but your opponent can now run over your extremely tiny guys. I mean, so for example, 1600 defense, okay? This guy has 1200 defense. This guy has 0 defense. The synchros usually have more, like 22, but those are pretty small compared to the defenses that you're going to, or the attacks that you're going to see on a lot of like actual boss monsters. So they can run over your stuff. I don't know if you guys saw, there was a DB Grinder video, I think an Iron Man with Lukasaku and Triff. Triff was on Malice, Lukasaku was on Yummy Pure. And Triff set an Ash Blossom after having removed, like banished the field spell, and there was no way that Yummy could run over the Ash Blossom. The 1800 defense was simply too big, so there's no way to get over that. So this is why I'm saying you should think of this field spell as kind of like a win condition. And the thing is that basically every extra deck has in a Little Knight. If you can make a Little Knight, it means you can target the field spell and banish it. Now, a couple things to notice here. You can technically save your field spell from banishment with surprise, because this has one effect that says return a field spell from your face up field or graveyard to the hand. Then you can place a Yummy field spell from your hand face up on your field. Even if you replace the same minion, it's going to be a different card, and so the Little Knight isn't going to banish it. Or you can just keep it in your hand if you think that it will be more valuable there at that moment. So there, you can save it with that. You also can also have the Onari guy. So remember, this guy says your opponent cannot target cards in the field zone with card effects. Normally you use this to add back your surprise from graveyard, but this effect could be important if you think your opponent is gunning for your field spell because they think that it's basically a lose condition for you if you lose it. So your opponent can't target it. So if they have some targeted removal and you're very afraid of that, and you're going really well on your resource economy, you can just make this card, hopefully add back a surprise and protect your field spell as well. So that's something that you should keep in mind as well. Okay, so those are some of the big issues with this deck, is you lose your win condition if you lose access to this. And something else that's very important I want to talk about with some of the issues in the Yummy game plan is, let's say that you look at your deck list and you're thinking, I need a little bit more consistency. I do have these 9 names and I have Obedient Schooled, but I would like another way to be able to play in Pure. And so maybe you will look at a card like Rice Map, which at the start of your main phase 1 adds a monster with 0 attack from your deck to your hand and halves your life points. And then there's a bunch of other restrictions that are not super important, but the most important thing is this can actually search for your Cupsy. So you could search for the Cupsy, normal the Cupsy, and then you can search for Surprise. And starting with Surprise is the best possible thing that you can do in Yummy. Even if you start with a Cupsy in your hand, searching for the Cupsy off of your Rice Map, assuming you don't get drolled or whatever, is still good, because you can normal one Cupsy and then you can special the other one. So they're just bodies. You don't lose any resource from having 2 Cupsies in hand. You would never really complain about having hard drawn 2 Cupsies because you have a normal and then you have the inherent special summon that all of the Yummy monsters have. The problem is, if we exist in a droll format, lots of cards that would have been good or strong contenders for a pure or a non-pure version of Yummy become a lot less attractive. If you begin your turn with Piri Rice Map, your deck, which naturally only searches twice, there's the surprise off of Cupsy, and then there's the Cupsy Synchro searching for the 2 missing names, you can't do either of those. Whereas if you get drolled normally in the pure version, you will have either already searched twice off of this, or you will have gotten your surprise. Both of those are pretty good things to have done through droll. But this does not play into droll. So if you play like something like this, or in the Fiendsmith version, if you go, like activate Engraver and you get drolled, it means that you don't have any searches off of Yummy. So a deck that would normally never lose to droll is now all of a sudden going to lose to droll, potentially. So you can't just throw consistency cards into Yummy and think that your deck is going to be better. Okay, there is another issue that Yummy has when you're trying to play a bunch of other stuff with it, and that is that you usually have to reduce the number of the Yummy cards in your extra deck. So I would always prefer to play 3 Snatchy, because you can go through multiple of these in a combo, or in a grind game, you're going to have to go through multiple of these cards. And really your only reliable way to recycle them is with the field spell type effect, where you can target the Yummy monsters in your graveyard or banishment and place them in your deck. So you can do that, but you don't want to rely on that type of effect. You would rather just have access to these in your extra deck. And so the more other cards you play, like the Desiree, the Wave High King, whatever package you're playing, it means the less likely you are to be able to play 3 Snatchy. And a lot of people also like to play, like 2 Cupsy Yummy Way, for example, and then just one of the others or something like that. So those are less important. These things are less important, but playing at least 2, preferably 3 Yummy Snatchy, I would say is pretty good. You should be doing that if you can do it. Another thing to mention about pure Yummy that is great that you lose if you start playing a sub-engine is that you don't play around Izuna anymore. So Izuna, just for in case anyone has forgotten, one of the most important cards of the entire upcoming format, is this card says, during the main phase, if your opponent has activated a monster effect in the hand or graveyard this turn, quick effect, you can special summon this card from your hand. Then you dump the Lupus can bring itself out, and you go for a quick rank 5. So if you were playing something like an Engraver, you're going to turn on their Izuna, whereas all of these inherent summons will never turn on the Izuna. So being able to push through more things is obviously good in a deck that will lose to removal on your normal summon. Like if you just go normal summon Cookie, they remove it, and you have some other way of putting another body on field and they remove it, then you're just going to lose. You know, like if you activate Obedient School, it gets ashed, you normal summon a body, it gets removed. What is your play? You don't really have much of a play after that. So you're often going to want sub-engines to be able to supplement your play and have more gas. But then you're also going to be able to turn on your opponent's Zuna. So one other thing, two other points I want to mention. So Fua Loss is kind of weird into Yummy because you can make like a quarter or a half board into certain Charmies and feel like you didn't give them that many draws, but they can just Fua on their turn as well. Whether they have drawn it as their draw for turn or they already had it in their hand, maybe they had two, whatever, they can still Fua on their own turn. And then when you tag out with your Synchro Monster to start going for your whatever plays you're going to make, you're going to be playing into their Fua. So you have to keep that in mind. One other thing that I wanted to mention is sometimes you're going to see that people will place a Herald on field and the opponent will go normal summon something, not use any effects so that you don't have the opportunity to tag out with any of your synchros and you'll book their guy or whatever, just normal summon and go to run over the Herald. And so what you will often see the Yummy player do is they will activate Surprise, they'll bring out a cookie from Graveyard, and they'll use the effect to reduce the opponent's monster's attack by 1,000. And most things cannot run over a Herald's 1,000 defense. Like most just basic normal summon cards that don't do any effect, don't start in chain anything, will usually not be able to run over this if you reduce their attack by 1,000 with the cookie. But the problem with that is, even though you save your Herald, you are using your Surprise, which is your most important layer, and so then you're totally susceptible to something like a Dark Ruler. Because normally, if your opponent goes Dark Ruler, and they Dark Ruler your entire board, as long as you have Surprise, you can still go through the exact same Yummy resource loop, because you can bring out a Synchro from Graveyard, for example, and you can just go through everything the same way you would have before. But if you are forced to use your Surprise, you're going to lose that layer, and then you're going to be more susceptible to cards like Dark Ruler and Droplet, etc. Okay, so now to close off the video, I want to briefly show you a combo line here, and shout out to Cyber for showing me this deck list, and or almost exactly this deck list, and also the combo. So this is Fiendsmith Azamina Yummy, and this is trying to fix some of the Yummy weaknesses where playing into a board especially, just losing to spot removal doesn't happen anymore because we have multiple other engines to push through stuff. And we also have different types of layers. There are different ways you could try to build this deck. You can play other Sinful Spoils targets like trap cards. You could have other things set in your back row. You have access to an Omni Negate. You have a lot of gas that your opponent has to interact with. But I'll show you how, while you make the Yummy game plan better in a way, you also add new choke points into it. So, okay. Here we're going to start with a blank Yummy and then also a blank monster because this will be our Deception Tribute later on. So here we're going to summon our cookie, go into our Snatchy, which places our minion. Minion will reborn the cookie, and now we have two that we can go into the Cupsy Synchro. Cupsy Synchro will search for 2, discard 1. I actually like to discard the blank here and keep these bodies in hand. I'll show you why this is important for your resilience as you think about your opponent having different types of cards like Nibiru. So here I'm going to discard the Ash because both the Ash and the Lollipop can work as the Deception Tribute fodder. But you would typically rather have a blank Yummy name in hand where you have not used this inherent summon effect, because if something happens like in the Nibiru where you turn the token into a Link Spider, you can still summon this from hand, and then that can still go into some other Yummy Synchro. So you'd rather have this blank body in hand rather than something like an Ash. And obviously if you needed to use the Ash beforehand for like, you know, a Charmy or something, you would have done that earlier. So at this point, if you haven't used the Ash just in this example, then you probably discard that blank and you keep another monster in hand because it'll either just be Deception Tribute fodder or it'll be an important body to continue playing. So anyhow, now we summon our Cupsy, and typically we want to do this on summon 5 so that we have our access to Surprise here. And I'm going to show you, it's very important that you have one of these 2 cards in your hand at all times. I'll explain that in a moment. So we have our blank unused Yummy name, and then we also have access to our Surprise. So here I'm going to activate Surprise and bring out our Snatchy. Now you may be wondering, isn't this very risky? Using your Surprise here, the Surprise is going to go into the graveyard, and we do not have this layer anymore for our opponent's turn. We also don't have it to protect our plays. Now, first of all, if they nib us, as I said, you turn the token into a Link Spider, and you still have your Lollipop Yummy. But we're going to add this back later in the combo. So now we go into the Lollipop Synchro, and that will bring back 2 bodies, but their effects are negated. And we can now turn those into Closed Heaven, which goes into Requiem, which goes into Lacrima. Lacrima will now dump the Engraver. Now remember that in your end board, you want to have the Surprise in the Spell and Trap zone, we'll deal with that in a moment, and you want to have a Yummy Synchro monster, so there's already pressure on the end board. So you have the surprise in the back row and you have the Yummy Synchro here. Now the reason that we have two of these on field right now is that one of them is going to be a level 2 tuner to turn itself and the Lacrima into our Arciela. The Arciela can send a Speller Trap, in which case the minion, which we can still recycle later if we want, to search for the Azamina LZ. Now, here we have a problem in that we will turn on Izuna if we're going to use this card in our hand. So this is one of the issues you're introducing into the Yummy game plan that it did not have before. So here we're going to summon the Azamina LZ. We're going to turn those into Diabell Queen. The Azamina LZ can search for Deception, and Diabell Queen can add back our Surprise. Now, we have added back Surprise while still having Lollipop Yummy in hand. So remember, if they nibbed us and we didn't have Surprise, we can still sum this out and we can go into, you know, like whatever. Okay, so now we have our Deception. We can activate Deception and tribute the Lollipop Yummy in hand. Because we have added back the Yummy Surprise, it is less important that we have this in our hand. So we've always had one of the two in hand since the moment we were on Summon 5, and that helps us insulate our plays against something like a Nibiru. Okay, so now we go for the Hallowed Azamina. Hallowed will send the Deception to go for the Murcielago. Murcielago will search for the Wanted. Now we can add back Hallowed by shuffling back the Azamina LZ from our grave, and we can do the classic Hallowed Chainlink 1, Wanted Chainlink 2, searching for a Black Witch. Here we're going to bring out the Ilia Sylvia. So now we have our Omni Negate. As usual, if you're playing an Omni Negate, it usually forces your opponent to do something around the time that you're going to bring out the Omni Negate. We still have our Surprise in hand. So now we summon the Black Witch, and we're going to set a blank Sinful Spoils. This can be a trap, whatever else you want to play. I'm choosing to play Subversion here because it's better playing into boards, but you can play whatever. This is just a blank Sinful Spoils that the Black Witch is going to be searching. So now you can shuffle back the Closed Heaven, bring out the Engraver, and unfortunately in this version, you have to go for sequence here. You can't really, without going out of your way, go for the Wave Hiking instead because you're using the Lacrima as part of your synchro material for the Arciela. And so it's not like you can just equip the Requiem, turn that into Necroquip, and then bring out the Engraver later and go into Wave Hiking Caesar. So you are going to go for the sequence, and you are going to make the Desiree here, shuffling back all of your Fiends. So you have like less good follow-up in the graveyard because you have no more Fiends in the graveyard, but you are going to have access to the Desiree. So here you're going to have the Cupsy Synchro. So this is live because you have your Snatchy, Link 1 in here. You have another Yummy Synchro, and then you have your Cookie, you have your Cupsy, and you also have your Lollipop. So you basically have everything. You can choose from your toolbox whatever you want with the Cupsy Synchro. You have your Desiree, you have your Diabell Queen, which worst case scenario can send the blank Sinful Spoils card if it's not something you're going to be using. It can also send a sequence after you've used your Desiree. You have your Omni Negate, and you have your Surprise, which obviously you're going to set. The Deception will reset itself in the end phase unless you want to use the Wanted draw instead. At any point, you could choose to do the minion recycle by putting back 2 of the Yummy monsters, but I generally don't do this in this scenario because I want to have access to my entire toolbox so I can choose what I want to bring out off of the Synchro. So the point of this combo is to show you that even if you try to be very careful to insulate your plays, for example, by keeping either Surprise or your other blank Yummy in hand to insulate yourself as much as possible, and you have a much stronger end board, or if you're playing through interactions like hand traps and stuff, you're going to have more types of cards, more types of engine cards that you can push through stuff with. You know, like your opponent's probably going to interact with a Black Witch trying to set a Deception to go into your Murcielago or Ilia Sylvia plays. They're probably not going to allow you to do that. Or if you start with like an Engraver, your opponent's probably going to try to do something to stop you from making, you know, they don't know if you're going to go for Desiree or Wave Hiking or whatever. They're probably going to do something, right? So that means that it's easier for you to go for your Yummy plays through those types of interactions. But the downside is you're going to be playing heavier into Droll, and then if you're going to activate something like Engraver from hand or the LZ Azamina, you are going to be turning on a potential Izuna. Obviously, you can choose to do that on purpose if you're playing cards like Talents or Thrust and you've drawn those cards and you actually want them to Izuna. You know, there are like lots of different layers to the game, but the point is, what I want to show you is that Yummy has a few fundamental weaknesses. I pointed them out earlier in the video, and whether you choose to supplement the deck by playing another engine, you will probably introduce other weaknesses while fixing the core ones that you were trying to deal with in the first place. So anyhow, I hope this has given you some insight on how Yummy works. It's a slightly more advanced video. Please give me feedback on what other types of content you would like to see in Justice Hunters format. Also, by the way, I have a Buy Me a Coffee link in the description below. So if you want to support me, feel free to do so. All the money will go back into the channel. Thanks for watching.